Eccoci pronti per cominciare. Allora, per prima cosa vi dirò che è una giornata strana oggi, perché voi vedete Piazza della Signoria insolitamente vuota. Ci sono pochissime persone, ovviamente l'emergenza Covid è la principale responsabile, e vedete che la piazza in the middle, sorry I started in Italian, hi Sarah, good to have you here. You see that the square is empty in the middle, so there are few tourists, just very few compared to what we are normally used to see here, because there was an event and they just took down the scaffolding with the stage and the other structures that were present. Ciao Barbara from Massachusetts. So we're going to start this tour of the piazza with just a little walk, and I'm going to tell you something about the different statues that you see in the square and the building that face the square itself. See the statue to Cosimo I, you see the statue of the Neptune right here, and we're gonna go into details regarding each of them. But first of all, you see that the square is L-shaped, and it was not conceived like that. The reason why it's L-shaped is that part of the space was the space occupied by the houses of the Ghibellines. And after they were defeated in the Battle of Benevento, never to come back, there were several battles between Guelphs and Ghibellines that, as you might recall from your school days, were the two parties in conflict throughout the Middle Ages in Italy, and not only one part, the Guelphs supporting the papacy and another part supporting the emperor. From what you can see, the flags that are on the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio, that is still now the seat of the city of Florence, of the municipal government of Florence, the white background and the red lily, that's the Guelph lily. It means that the Guelphs really want to stay here in Florence. And when the Ghibellines were defeated for good, their homes were knocked down to the ground, and that's the part that was here. And they were knocked down to make more space, and that's why you have this square that is shaped like an L. It's a very large square, as I mentioned in the previews that we did. It's a square that really witnessed basically 800 years of history, because we are going back to the 13th century. That's when the square received its sort of semblance that we still have today. And of course, the most massive building that you have here that dominates the entire square is the Palazzo Vecchio. Of course, I always tell my students, Vecchio now, it was not born Vecchio. When it was born, it was Nuovo, and its name was Palazzo della Signoria. Signoria was the body of people that ruled Florence. And Florence being a very proud republic, the 9 priors, amongst them Dante was one of the first priors of the city. He did not get to stay in this palace because they started building it in 1299, and it was completed only in 1314, and Dante was into exile from 1300 while he was on a delegation, on an embassy to Pope Boniface VIII in Rome. He was condemned under false charges of corruption and remained in exile for the rest of his days, could not return to his beloved Florence. So this is the building where the politics of Florence was assessed. And Machiavelli had an office right here. You see the balcony with the flags. Okay, here they are. That's the office of the mayor of Florence. And next to it, there is Machiavelli's office. You can say that he was a sort of Secretary of State of the Florentine Republic. So the building, basically, without interruption, occupied the governing member, the ruling body of Florence from the end of the 12th century until today. And again, the mayor of Florence still has his offices there, along with the offices of the other commissioners and of the city council of Florence. Of course, the building underwent many changes throughout the centuries, because it was first simply the place where the 9 priori stayed, and Florence was so proud of its republican institutions that it limited the time that a person could serve as a priore, and therefore it was only 2 months And they were not elected, but they were drafted. There were bags in the Church of Santa Croce, leather bags, with the names of all the qualifying citizens of Florence, that could become members of the Signoria. And there are many statues, as you see, and many of them are very, very famous, as you know, and you will recognize them. We're going to go visit them from up close very shortly. And what I'm interested in, more than the purely artistic value of the statues, is their political meaning, their political allegory. Again, this is the pulsing political heart of Florence. In one of the next walks with the director, we're going to visit Piazza del Duomo. That is, of course, the religious heart of Florence. But this is the political. This is where politics were made. These were the big decisions were made. And we start first with this guy here. This guy here is called Marzocco. It's a beautiful lion, and it comes with a name. And there are many hypotheses about where the name comes from. And many of them are really wild and I don't think very plausible. So I'm going to spare them all to you. You can easily find them online. The original statue of the Marzocco, of this beautiful austere and noble lion, is in the Bargello Museum that used to be the tribunal, the courthouse of Florence. And what you see here is just a copy of it. The original was sculpted by Donatello at the beginning of his career, 1420. And why a lion? You see, it's a lion with his big paw on the shield with the representation of the coat of arms of Florence. Once again, it's a Guelph red lily in a white background. And why the lion? Also for this, there are many hypotheses. But of course, in all heraldry, the lion is always a symbol of fierceness, of nobility, of courage, of bravery. And of course, Florence identified itself in all these values. And Florence, the curiosity is that not far from here, there is a Via dei Leoni. And it's called Via dei Leoni because on top of having a lion in their coat of arms as the sort of their mascot, they also had living lions. At a point, they arrived to have some 30 lions in cages visible to the public. And there was great cause for celebration when Leoncini, the little lions, were born, and kids went to see them and they gave them names. So there was this very strange relationship with lions, imported probably from North Africa. Ciao Patrizia. Next to the lion, you have another statue by Donatello. This is also a copy. And here is when the political story starts becoming very interesting. It's a statue representing Judith and Oloferne. Once again, this is a copy. The original is inside Palazzo Vecchio in the Salone dei Gigli. And originally it might have been gilded, and there are just some traces of the gold on the sword. We're going to move now slowly because I'm going to tell you something more about Judith in a minute.
And for 3 days we have a Ferrari event. I don't like these events, I don't like fashion.
Annoying tour guides are all over the place. Even if there are not many tourists, they still manage to be annoying and to come next to you with their loud speakers. But this gives us an excuse to complete our tour. And what I was telling you about Judith and Oloferne. Judith is a Jewish heroine. She is her story is narrated in the book of Judith, that is considered a deuterocanonical book, but it's in the Catholic Bible. It's the story of this young girl that decides to take the situation in her own hands to free her people from the tyranny of Oloferne, who is an Assyrian general. And with the help of her maid, she reaches the chambers of Oloferne and beheads him. As you know, it's a symbol of independence and courage, and especially female independence and courage, and Republican independence and courage from very early times. And we continue our tour. So it was a very powerful political symbol. Specifically, that statue that was commissioned by somebody who was considered by many an enemy of the Republic, Cosimo de' Medici. Cosimo the Elder, nicknamed Pater Patria, the father of the fatherland, was really the founder of the political fortunes of the Medici. Before, they were a very powerful banking family with branches all over the world, but at the same time not very involved in politics. They served their terms when it came, but with Cosimo things start getting a bit more organized, and his influence over the government of Florence becomes more systematic. So he's the one who commissions the Judith, and she was originally inside his palazzo, Palazzo Medici, here, not far from here, what was called then Via Grande, and it's now Via Cavour. And it came to the square only when the Medici were kicked out of Florence, and it was brought to the square as a very powerful sign of Florentine republicanism, as a sort of a reaction to the temptations of hegemony that the Medici exercised. So, commissioned by Cosimo de' Medici, considered by many the enemy of the Republic and responsible for creating a signoria, kind of family lordship in the city, Giuditta ends up being in front of the Palazzo Vecchio in an area called Arengario, where that they used to address people publicly, and becomes a very powerful symbol of Republican democracy. Next to Judith, as you see, there is that big guy, and as soon as we passed by the pieces of the scaffolding, you will immediately recognize him. And it is the copy. These are, so far we have seen copies. So the Judith copy is in the Bargello Museum, and this guy that you recognize, there you go, it's the David by Michelangelo. And again, on top of the door of the main access door to the Palazzo della Signoria, you also see two lions. So lions are pretty much everywhere. And even here, at the entrance of the Loggia dei Lanzi, there are two lions. So lions were very big, and again, recognized symbols of Florence. It's beautiful. This one looks pretty scary, but they're normally also pretty friendly. We're gonna go back to the guy in a minute. Okay, you see the two lions up there on the beautiful portal that gives you access to the Palazzo della Signoria. So the David that you see here is a copy. The piece of marble, the block of marble that was chosen, had already some problems. Michelangelo was not the first one that was asked to sculpt it, and other sculptors gave up because they felt that it was not the proper piece of marble and that it might crack at some point. Michelangelo faced the challenge, and around 1500, at a very enthusiastic moment of Republican Florence, right, or more or less at the end of the rule of Girolamo Savonarola, he sculpts these heroes. So it's another biblical hero along with Judith, that is his neighbor right here. See the collocation? So you start with the lion, then Judith, and then David here. It's another symbol of Republican Florence. As you know, again, this is the copy, but it's an identical copy, of course. And it's David in the moment of rest after he actually killed Goliath. Some people have underlined the disproportion of the hands and the head because this was not the location for which Michelangelo conceived it. It was actually a commission from the Opera del Duomo for the cathedral. It was supposed to be at the basis of the dome that had just been built by Filippo Brunelleschi. So that's the reason why the head and the hands are disproportionate, because if you imagine it up there, then everything would have been fine from an upside down perspective. And here it's basically almost at eye level. It's about 5 meters tall. Next to David, you have Hercules in one of his fatiche, 12 of them. This is a statue that was made in 1533. So David was a commission that happened at the time of the Florentine Republic, and it was completed around 1504. So it's a Republican symbol. Here we have a commission from the Medici when they return after the Republic is overthrown. And Baccio Bandinelli is the author of this 1533 statue that was harshly criticized by many, and especially by one Benvenuto Cellini, who is the author of this beauty, that is actually my favorite statue here. unlike all the other ones, this is an original. This is not a copy. This is the real thing. And it's a statue of Perseus. So we're not talking about biblical heroes. We're talking about Greek mythology here. After he beheads the Medusa, and he tramples over her body. So this is a statue in bronze. Remarkably, it was made into only 3 pieces, and namely the head of Medusa and the sword, and then the rest was basically 1 piece, and it was a remarkable effort. Nobody ever did such a huge statue in basically 1 piece. The Judith that we saw there was fused in 11 pieces. So from a purely technical point of view, it's quite a marathon. And Cellini gives a beautiful, lively, sparkling account, as only he could do in his autobiography, in which he tells that at some point while they were fusing the piece, they realized that they were low on metal, and he basically threw in all the metal that he could find in his home to be able to complete the fusion of the statue. The statue has been recently restored, and that's why it appears to us in all its beauty. And we cannot access the back of I just want to show you some details of the face. What is the political allegory here? It's basically an allegory of authority winning over anarchy. The Medici had been restored after the brief Republican interval, and they wanted to show everybody that they knew how to deal with riots, with people that refuse their authority. And Perseus is a very powerful symbol of authority that tramples over anarchy or democracy, depending on how you look at it. So, Cellini, and I strongly encourage you to read his autobiography, because it's not only interesting and enlightening, but it's also a lot of fun to read. Talks about this other statue. As I told you, he was a big detractor of Baccio Bandinelli, and he's saying that it looks like they put a sack of watermelons against the wall of the Palazzo Vecchio. So he refers to the way in which Bandinelli portrays the muscles of Hercules. I mean, it can be argued, but the Florentines, of course, have a taste for criticizing the masterpieces, also because that being used to the symbols that we just saw, everything else doesn't quite match their models. And you have these beautiful 2 statues. It's the allegory of 2 mythical husband and wife, and they're at the entrance of the palazzo. And it's interesting that right now that's the entrance also used by couples that wish to be married in the Palazzo Vecchio. They pass through these 2 mythical couples. So what I wanted to say is that basically this statue that is famous worldwide for its beauty as an architectural space, but also for the statues in it. It's actually a place for political dialogue, and I can imagine also argument, because there are Republican symbols, there are absolutist symbols, and they all are present, and one next to the other. And it is as if the political discussion in Florence continues through these statues. The last 2, and we're going to move there very shortly, but first I need to show you right this. Some of you might remember and recognize this. Attached to the Palazzo Vecchio, that became the residence of the Medici when they returned to Florence after 1513. They left their palace, their private house in Via Cavour that I just mentioned before, and they decided to move here in the Palazzo Vecchio. And you see that little suspended covered bridge that connects the Palazzo Vecchio to this other massive building that you might recognize. It's the Galleria degli Uffizi. The Galleria degli Uffizi was designed by Vasari. Uffizi means offices, and these were offices that were needed. Was no longer a small, autonomous, self-serving city-state, but it had become a real state, the real capital of a state that coincided with Tuscany, and therefore it needed a larger bureaucracy to develop. And it's a fantastic building that, as you know, right now it houses the Uffizi Museum, one of the most important museums in the world, and that lodge back there leads directly to the Arno River. And this is also part of the Uffizi Gallery that is under restoration. Again, we are seeing Florence with unusually few people, and it's on one hand sad, but on the other side it's really beautiful to be able to enjoy it like this. And as you know, along the colonnade of the Uffizi there are the statues of the great Florentine, including Andrea Orcagna, that is the architect of the Loggia dei Lanzi, that is right behind me here. We have a vision of it. The loggia, I didn't tell you, it's called now normally Loggia dei Lanzi, but its original name was Loggia della Signoria or Loggia dell'Orcagna, from the name of the architect that designed it. And soon enough, when Florence was no longer a republic, but it was again under the Medici rule, it became an outdoor sculpture garden, you can say, or a sculpture gallery. An outdoor museum is now part of the Uffizi Museum complex. At the back of the loggia there are Greek and Roman statues, and at the front there are the most modern in the sense of Renaissance statues like Cellini Perseus. And what was this loggia used for? It was, again, a loggia where the signori, the priors, the rulers of the city would have a cover for presiding over a public celebration that had the participation of the people. This is the rape of the Sabine women by Giambologna, and we're going to see Giambologna, actually, despite the name sounding very Italian, was actually from France, but he came to Florence when he was only 18 and called it its home. So here we see now a view of the other palaces overlooking the square. This is a 19th century palace. It's called Palazzo delle Assicurazioni, made in the Renaissance style in order to match the style of the rest of the square. One of the things that normally surprises and impresses my students is that everybody is naked in Piazza della Signoria, with a few exceptions. The statues I'm talking about, not people. And everybody wonders, how was that possible? In a Catholic country like Italy, everybody naked, men, women. We are reaching now the Neptune, where we started our tour, and you see it's called Il Biancone by the Florentine, big white one. And the Florentines, as they were not too happy with the Hercules by Baccio Bandinelli, they were not too happy with the Neptune sculpted in around 1560 by Ammannati. And they even came up with a little rhyme that was Ammannato, ammannato, quanto bel marmo tu hai rovinato, or sciupato, or Ammannati, and they changed it into Ammannato to make the rhyme with rovinato, how much beautiful marble you ruin with your fountain. Of course, they were picky. They were used to Michelangelo and later to Cellini, and of course anybody else was not up to their expectations. So the main sculpture that celebrate the fact that Florence had become now a capital of a state that also had access to the sea, because it reached Siena and Pisa, and it was the first public fountain that the city had. So the main sculpture is Neptune in white marble, but then there are also these other mythical figures underneath, and these are by Giambologna, the same sculpture that did the rape of the Sabine women in the Loggia dei Lanzi. And you see it's a very complex, beautiful statue, and there's a marble plaque right behind it that dates back to the time, and it says that it's severely prohibited to wash clothes or dispose of garbage in the fountain. Apparently it's not a thing that people used to do. So we're going back to the idea of nakedness. Why is everybody naked in this square? How was it possible? Well, it has to do with philosophy. These things never happened by chance. And the fact is that in Florence in the 15th century, there was a philosophical movement, a Neoplatonic movement, with a incredible concentration of intellectuals. One of them, Giannozzo Manetti, wrote a treatise called De Dignitate et Excellentia Hominis, of the dignity and excellence of the human being, in which he explicitly exalts the human body in all its beauty and power and in the pleasure that it gives. So unlike many church fathers that, especially throughout the Middle Ages, warned people from the pleasure that came from the flesh and from the body, Giannozzo Manetti exalted the naked body as the most beautiful thing created by God, and therefore he sort of provided the best possible intellectual authorization to sculptors like Michelangelo and Cellini and later Giambologna and Mannati to sculpt naked statues. The naked body no longer seen as something sinful or simply an occasion for sin, but something beautiful to be celebrated, and as it is in this case, to be celebrated right in the middle of the public square of Florence. And do not forget that David, totally naked, full frontal nudity if you wish, was supposed to be on the cathedral, right at the base of the dome by Brunelleschi. And the only reason why it didn't happen, it didn't end up there, is that they decided to give him a more prominent space here in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, so to turn him into a political allegory much more than into a religious allegory, being a biblical hero. But again, it's a completely naked man, and it was supposed to be right on the cathedral. Naked women too. We saw the rape of the Sabine women, and here you saw there are some there. And of course, the most important naked lady in Florence would probably be Venus in The Birth of Venus by Botticelli, that is right behind the Loggia dei Lanzi, right there. That's where her home is. We're seeing the top of the Loggia dei Lanzi or Loggia della Signoria. That is now a beautiful terrace cafe for the Uffizi. So when you visit the museum, you can also have a coffee or a drink on top of the Loggia dei Lanzi and be right on top of all these beauty. The last statue I want to present you tonight is this statue. That's Cosimo I, statue that was commissioned by his son, who was the first Medici to have an official title, a ducal title. Remember that they had ruled Florence for several generations, but always as private citizens, never having any title. So Cosimo is the first one who has the title, and he gets a statue on top of a horse. Hi Manas, my friend and colleague Manas is online, and I'm grateful. She would do a much better job than I do at doing this, but I'm grateful that she's watching and listening. So the statue to Cosimo really epitomizes and closes the circle. So after all this political dialogue between republicanism and authoritarianism, or the rule of one or the rule of the Medici, the dispute was resolved when they got the title, and the second time they came back in 1530 to stay until the end of their house in the early 18th century, when the last of the Medici died, the Elettrice Palatina, Maria Ludovica, but she also had the great idea of leaving to the city and the people of Florence the entire art collection of her family. She knew she couldn't do anything with the principality that remained to the Lorraine family, but she could do something about the collection, and she claimed that it was the private collection of her family, and that's why it has to stay. But the statue of Cosimo, once again commissioned to Giambologna, was really a turning point. It represented the end of the man riding a horse and portrayed like the great condottieri of antiquity, like the great kings and queens. The interesting fact is that the Florentines, when the statue was unveiled, got to love the horse much more than the knight on it, in Cosimo, and they were all commenting on the horse itself much more than on the horse. So these, so again, the political allegory, the political discussion that I imagine here happens every night when everybody leaves the square and the statues are left alone and they can support their ideas pro-Medici against the Medici, pro the Republic against the Republic. And then the other fact that I want to underline once again is nudity. Nudity that was not perceived as sinful, and that was not only thanks to the artist, whose fantastic work we have admired today, but it was thanks to the philosophers that provided them with the intellectual weaponry, with the dialectic arguments to support the idea that the human body is beautiful and should not be hidden, it should be celebrated and somehow glorified. And that's what happens in this beautiful square. I think I'm done for the day. And the next walk with the director is probably gonna be Piazza del Duomo, and I'm heading there right now, but I'm gonna let you go. Stay tuned. Grazie a te, Sara. Stay tuned. We'll let you know via our social media and the newsletter of Casa Italiana when the next walk is. And again, it's going to be still here in Florence, and it's going to be Piazza del Duomo.